Let me introduce myself. My name is Muriel Williman. I'm the president of the North Carolina Composting Council. I've been in waste management for about 30 years, and in that history I worked for Chatham County, Orange County, a small nonprofit in Durham called SunShares back in the late 90s, and now I work for the city of Durham. And the SunShares job was my first recycling job, but that's where I also learned that vermiculture was something that you could really spread far and wide. So I think there's a lot of different experience here in the room, and I'm curious about that, but I'm just going to teach vermicomposting the way that I do it. There are a lot of different methods, but this is the way that I learned. I went to college in upstate New York, and I was surrounded by brick and concrete. And even though I had grown up with my mom composting, she had a big garden, she composted outdoors. I grew up with organic methods of growing food. When I went to college, I felt very detached from that. And so a friend of mine in the environmental studies program gave me a handful of her worms and taught me how to compost inside my 4-story apartment. And so now I believe, and I say, anyone can compost anywhere. I swear you can. If you can in a little tiny apartment in New York, then you can do it anywhere. And so since then, I have also shared my worms probably hundreds of times since then. Some of my lineage is now in Alaska, Texas. They've just moved. It's like the sourdough starter of environmentalists, right? We've been talking about like, oh, she just gave me a handful of worms and boom. So it went. So I've made a lot of mistakes along the way. And so I'm going to share those with you too, because nothing like experience to teach us things, but you don't have to make the same mistakes that I did. You'll make your own. No. And before I get my hands all dirty, I'm going to just go over a few of the flyers that I brought. These are old school too. Rhonda Sherman, you may know her. She's with Cooperative Extension. I think I'm the compost queen. She's kind of the goddess. So she wrote literally the book on vermicomposting, but this is a nice one-pager that teaches vermicomposting very much the way that I do. Martha Stewart skyrocketed in my estimation when she did a piece on vermiculture. She also teaches composting very much the way that I do, with a plastic bin, about 12 gallons, drill some holes in it, but she says to get your worms from a bait store. No, Martha, that's wrong. You want to get, these are very special worms. They're non-burrowing worms, so there are over 300 species of earthworms in North America. Only about 9 of them are non-burrowing. Worms that you get at a bait store may burrow hundreds of feet beneath the surface. They're nice and big. These are known as Acenia fetida, tiger worms, red wigglers. If you go to a bait store, you can ask for red wigglers. They'll say, yeah, they're red, they wiggle. It's sort of a colloquial term, but it's not necessarily the worms that you want. Because if you end up getting burrowing worms, they're not going to survive in a container like this for very long. They will not thrive. And so when people tell me that, oh, I got some worms and they all died, I think that it's probably because they were burrowing species and they were not living their best life. In fact, they couldn't survive because it was so counter to what their nature tells them to do. Non-burrowing worms live in the top 4 to 8 inches of soil where organic matter is breaking down all the time. So it's their job. They eat organic matter and they release this incredibly rich plant available nutrients known as castings. I do have, speaking of a dealer for worms, of Acenia fetida. This is a company in Durham. They're called New Soil Vermiculture. They come to the Durham Farmers Market. They are not selling worms really a lot right now because it's still a little early in the season for them. They are charging $20 for a half pound. So they have gone up, because when I was doing this, when I was living in Durham back in the 90s and I was buying worms from another dealer that I had in Durham at the time, they were $8 for a pound. But good news, you don't have to pay anything. If you know someone who has worms and you don't want to walk in the middle of that conversation, but like, oh, I like some worms. Can I give you some? Like, you know, anyway, we know what we're talking about. Then, you know, you can start with a very small population and just sort of nudge them along, feeding them gradually. I'll talk more about that. This flyer also has some troubleshooting tips. If you have fruit flies, or it's too wet, or it's too dry, or there's a bad smell, it has some mitigating things on here. So those are on the back table there. Help yourself. I wanted to do that before I got my hands in here because then they'll have my fingerprints. I think it seems like most of you are kind of familiar with vermiculture. This is actually the worm bin that I have in my office. I also have one at home. Even though I have a yard now and I can compost in my backyard, I still do vermiculture. I haven't harvested this in probably 8 months, maybe. It's been a while, so it's really heavy. Usually when I tell people that I'm composting in my office, what do you think the first thing they say is?
Does it smell?
It smells. Yeah. And what's the next thing they say?
Do they get active? Yeah.
Oh, it may be third. But then they also ask if there are flies. Like, oh, it must smell, there are flies, and yeah, what happens if they escape? So what I'm trying to create here is the ideal worm environment where they will never, ever, ever want to leave. Food comes out of the sky. Here's my big reveal. Nothing, no flies. There's really not much to it. I'm gonna tilt this towards there and then there, right? So even when I teach backyard composting, I like to start out with a worm bin because it's such a great encapsulation of the basic concepts of compost, whether you're composting indoors using worms or outdoors and using more of a chemical reaction with carbon and nitrogen. There are 4 basic ingredients: carbon, nitrogen that I just mentioned, water, air. That's it. Those are the only 4 ingredients. Then of course there's the microbial life, and in this case we've got the macrobial life of the worms. But this is loaded with castings, and so I'm just I need a volunteer. Who wants to smell it? Oh, she's like, I'm all over that. Bring it over here.
Smells good.
Oh, that's fantastic.
It's fantastic. She knows. She's like, yeah, whatever. I know what's up. Yeah, there's virtually no odor.
I can smell it from here.
Yeah, there's virtually no odor at all. And if there is, it's kind of a rich, earthy aroma.
Almost smells like tobacco, doesn't it?
Kind of did.
Oh, that's
Coffee or
interesting.
tobacco or something.
Oh,
Like
isn't
when you
that
go
lovely?
by the fields and it's drying.
Mm-hmm.
I've never heard that, but okay. I find it is a kind of a sweet. It does have that sort of sweetness to it that tobacco has too. Anyway, but yeah, it's sort of an earthy smell. And this is worm poop. I don't actually feel too weird about handling it because it did come from food that I ate. And also, worms just have this amazing properties of, when they consume rotting food, they're also eating the bacteria that's eating the rotting food. So in their gut, they add certain microbes, but they also tend to neutralize things. So I don't, there's such a thing as clean dirt. I don't know. I'm not gonna eat it or anything like that, but I definitely don't feel like there's anything, there's nothing pathological, would that be right? Thank you. There's nothing pathological about the castings that I'm holding. In fact, I feel quite the opposite about it, that it is part of the cycle of life, right? Mm-hmm. That the food that I eat can then be returned to this form where the nutrients are then available for plants to grow and to grow more food to feed me and my friends and other animals. And so, it's nothing less than the cycle of life right here. You did notice probably when I first flipped the bin over was that it's really predominantly covered with newspaper. And this is the carbon source that I like to use. It's an indoor system. I bring in newspaper. I get the Indy, off at the co-op. I'm telling you a lot about myself. I'm sure you're shocked that I shop at the co-op and I grab an Indy to read. But and so then I just use it. It comes into my house. It stays in my house. Outside, I like to use leaves. But indoors, I really want things to break down pretty quickly. I don't want anything sticking around for any length of time here. The worms will break stuff down in short order if I give them the right opportunity. What I don't want to have are fruit flies. And so fruit flies are surface to air organisms. They land on the top to feed. Or actually with some stacking bins, there are problems too because the flies will come up to the bottom to feed. So you're not actually able to cover the food on both sides. So that can be problematic, which is one reason why I personally prefer just having one tier. This is a soil ecosystem that I'm trying to build. I want it to be soil organisms. So just keep it down on the ground, if you will, one layer. I don't know, I mean, people like the tiered system, some of them, but I find they dry out, they can raise fruit flies, and I just don't think it's necessary. When you can get these for like, you know, $1.50 at the thrift store usually, you know what I'm saying, if you have your eyes open for it. But people, you know, I mean, this is just what I know and what I've grown used to. So at any rate, so the carbon on top, this newspaper is going to cover any food that I might put in here, so it discourages fruit flies. And instead, I bury the food under the newspaper and in the castings, okay? So I just bought about a gallon of strawberries at the farmer's market last weekend, and I hulled them, and so this is basically what's left from about a gallon worth of strawberries from the weekend. Nothing, basically, just a few leaves. I put a lot in here. I put like 2 cups of leaves in here. So they went to town. I did that very specifically on that side because what I'm going to do here, I'm going to kind of go to the end and then back to the beginning, because what I'm going to do here for you guys is harvest some of my compost. That's probably, you know, you want to have the compost to be able to put it in your plants at the end of the day, right? And so people are like, well, what do? Do you train them? You know, do they come when you call? No, they don't. But worms are subsurface organisms. And so even though they don't have eyes, they sense light through their skin. It's the most amazing thing. They sense light through their skin, and so when they're exposed to light, they know that they need to go down beneath the surface, right? So you can tell these are not night crawlers, these are not burrowing worms, right? These are not the kind of worms that you would get at a bait store. These are skinny minis. I had someone say, like, I could have hooked that. Okay, that's, shh, don't listen. Yeah, so.
How many worms do you think you have in that?
Well, let's start counting. I don't know. Probably several thousand at least. They say that there's about 1,000 worms in a pound. So, you know, I would say I probably have several thousand. I don't feed this very, very regular because I have a lot of competing places for my organic scraps. And so, you know, I just basically keep them alive to do demonstrations like this. So it's not as thriving a population as I might have. The cool things about worms, one of the many cool things, is that their population will rise and fall depending on the amount of food that's available to them. If you stop feeding them, they will no longer be reproductive. They'll stop making eggs. Isn't that smart? And so you can hold off. Generally what I will do when I'm going to be harvesting the compost is I will stop feeding them for a time. I mean, there's just so many. I mean, yeah, maybe 5,000, maybe more, I don't know. This is a very healthy population. So I'm actually gonna give them a little place to go down to, cover them up a little bit more. Okay, so I'm going to the end because I wanna give these guys and gals, I'll talk about that later, time to get down beneath the surface, because what they'll do, the light, and they'll go down beneath the surface, and then I can scoop off the top layer of compost, and underneath that we'll have a layer of worms, and I can keep doing that and doing that and doing that over the time that I'm talking to you. Okay, so I'm gonna go back and get to this as I lecture. Okay, so we're gonna let them do their thing, burrow down beneath the surface, and I'm gonna go back to carbon, nitrogen, water, air. Okay, so just had to do a little aside there because we're going to use those worms to make a new bin, and one of these lucky contestants will be able to bring it home. So anyway, so carbon. You've probably noticed by now that this is quite moist, so that water content is very necessary. Worms not only sense light through their skin, they also breathe through their skin. They don't have lungs, so their skin is semi-permeable, and they need moisture in order to have that gaseous exchange. So they breathe in oxygen, and if it gets too dry, then they won't be able to do that. If it gets too wet, then they won't be able to do that. So the ideal is what they call 70% saturation. Let me just make sure that I don't actually have worms in here before I give it a squeeze. So you can see all that moisture, right? So it doesn't drip unless I squeeze it, but it's about the wetness that you want. They say the consistency of a round sponge. And so that's 70% saturation. That's about the wetness that you want. So even though this is wet, 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 look how crumbly it is. Isn't that gorgeous? I mean, well, thank you.
I like yours.
I mean, you're my people. You know this is good poop right
This
here.
isn't what I look like during the daytime.
Okay, I hear you. I know I dressed up for this too. Anyway, so yeah, it's super, super crumbly. So even though it has, the compost also has that 70% saturation, the carbon provides structure and porosity. It's like the fiber in the diet. And so you can even see actually, if you look really closely, the light is pretty dim, but oops, you can't take me anywhere. Okay, thank you. See those newspaper fibers?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so you can actually see the newspaper fibers in there. So even though it's super wet, it has this clumping capability, but it also has this puffiness that allows air. You see the fibers?
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Close up. You can kind of, the light is not great. A little bit?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So the carbon is really necessary to help kind of prop everything up. Nitrogen comes from food that you put in. Nitrogenous waste, a lot of reading that you may see says it's green as opposed to browns. It's not always green. I have a sample. Sometimes it's yellow, sometimes it's red, sometimes it's, purple, but it's fresh vegetative material. So this is your nitrogen. If you didn't have any carbon, what would happen with the nitrogen? What do you think? Even if it had worms all in it, what's going to happen?
You have too much nitrogen.
No, something else is going to happen. It's going to smell. It's going to have a really bad odor. And what's causing that odor is that it's breaking down anaerobically, and those anaerobic gases are actually going to kill your worms. So that's why carbon is so very necessary. We're not trying to get a hot compost like you do outside where carbon and nitrogen react with each other in the presence of water. We're not doing that here, but we still need carbon in order to create that puffiness and also to make sure that there's air in here. And carbon just helps deal with odors. And sometimes I put stuff in that just naturally has a smell, like this, the broccoli stalk is going to have a bit of a smell to it. Certain things, and it just helps dissipate the odor. I have done some really, really dumb things. Fruits and vegetables, I'm super, super picky now about what I put in my worm bin. Just because I have had some die-offs that are absolutely devastating. These are air holes that also aids in them getting oxygen, not just the carbon. I also literally have air holes in it. And the surface air also is quite adequate, but kind of lost my train of thought.
Would you not put in?
Thank you.
Welcome.
So, fruits and vegetables, straight off the cutting board generally is what I do put in. No meat, no bones, no dairy, but they also do not like starch. So I took a pot of rice from the back of my fridge. This is also when I was in college, so it had been there for a couple of weeks, and it's like, well, I'm not going to eat this. I threw a chunk into my worm bin, that thing, it turned green and it smelled to high heaven. I knew that because when I got home and my kitchen floor was covered with worms, yes. And I opened it up and it was like, oh my goodness. I mean, they're, you know, not that they would want to go back in, but once they leave, they can't get back in. So they're down on the floor drying out and I have this situation. So, I mean, could you compost rice? Yeah, probably. But break it apart. Break it apart and sprinkle it in. But they're not a huge fan of starch. Like, you know, they prefer a no, like, I wouldn't put bread in here either. Also has a tendency to mold.
Potatoes.
Potatoes, peels, and spuds are
Peels
probably
are-
okay. Yeah, I think
That's
in,
a starch as well.
yeah, I guess there is an exception. I'm thinking like pasta, rice, grains. Thank you. That's probably better to put it that way. I eat more sweet potatoes than white potatoes anymore. Just my diet has shifted, and they love sweet potato peels. Like they will go to town on that, particularly ones that have already been cooked. Like they love the sweet, soft stuff, just like I do. They go for that first, you know, and then they'll eat the harder stuff later. Like, oh, okay, yes, I'll eat my spinach, you know, or my broccoli, or whatever later after the strawberries, you know, or after the banana peel. You know, you can do a little bit, but honestly, I would just keep it out. If you are composting all of your fruit and veggie scraps and you're throwing away some grains from time to time, don't feel bad. Also, my backyard bin is a lot more forgiving, like, you know, rotty, moldy stuff that I find in the bottom of my veggie drawer that I forgot about. I really don't give that to my worms. They maybe have anaerobic stuff, it may have other stuff going on. It's going to be in my kitchen or in my office or whatever. I want it to be aesthetically pleasing for me as well as not actually poisoning my worms. So I am very cautious. And, you know, I think people maybe lean into perfectionism a little bit. Like if I'm not able to compost everything, then maybe somehow it's not worth it. I surprised myself when I was in college and I literally reduced my garbage by nearly half. I didn't know I was eating that healthy, that's for sure, number one. But also, like, you know, it was the wettest and heaviest part of the garbage, so it just didn't have to go out that often, you know, it's just the way it was. So it really did change my life. Absolutely changed my life when I learned how to compost indoors. So, no meat, just because the fatty stuff, oils, you know, salad dressings, things like that. You know, can I put a salad in here? I would probably wash it, to be honest, just to get the oil off, because I don't want it to clump. When it clumps and there's no air in there, you know, oil and water do not mix, right? So it's going to clump together, and then I just don't want to have an anaerobic situation. The other thing I did, okay, corn, yes, it's a vegetable, but corn chips are really not. I put corn chips. I'm so embarrassed to even say it. I put corn chips in my worm bin. Don't do that. They are salty and they're greasy and they smell to high heaven. So don't do that either. Like corn on the cob, wonderful. They love the little crevices. Get in there. It'll take forever for them to break it down, but eventually they will. Melon rinds, they'll eat the soft material and you'll be left with just a filigree. One fun thing to do if you have, especially if you have neighbor or your own children, is to cut it. If you have a melon that's, you know, going bad or whatever, put half of it in, and then after maybe a week or so, pull it out, and you'll just like have basically a melon of worms. Super fun. Another way to capture worms, if you will, is to put your food scraps in a net bag like you have by oranges or lemons in, so the worms can come in through the holes, right? But you can still contain the material, and you can contain the worms, so then you can pull out a bag of worms, give it to a friend, just have them start another bin. It's graduation season, wedding season, they make great gifts. Just putting that out there, okay? Anyway, so that's my nitrogen. We've talked about the carbon. You can put brown leaves in here, they just take so long to break down. I really want things to kind of rock and roll. This broccoli tree, it's gonna take a lot longer to break down if I don't take 2 seconds and just chop it in half. A lot of fruits and vegetables are designed to repel bacteria They have a really thick wall that prevents decomposition. They don't want bacteria getting in there. So, you know, chopping things, making them smaller so that you have this pithy interior where the bacteria can get in and the worms can get in. It just breaks down the breakdown time. Sounds redundant, but you know what I mean. It shortens the breakdown time tremendously. If you just, someone described it to me once, it would be like being in a pantry full of cans without a can opener. You know, like you can't, you can't get in there. So open it up to that pithy interior, and that's super helpful. Of course, an apple core. Do I need the apple? Yes. The core, not so much. Oh, eggshells. This also comes up very often. Can I compost eggshells? Any guesses? Yes. So it's not that they can eat it like they do a banana peel or anything like that, but you can actually find, you know, eggshells here in my compost. It's more like they erode, you know, and the calcium is actually a very nice addition. It's hard to come by in nature. Calcium takes a lot of protein to produce, so it's expensive, but they also love the albumin, and they just eat it up, and I've never had any problems with odor or anything. I'll find a worm kind of cupped, you know, curled up in the cup of the egg. I do crush them, and just to, you know, again, just to make life a little bit easier, I don't want to come, I'm going to put this in my garden, you know what I mean, eventually, or in a potted plant. So I don't want to really come across a big shell, because it does not break down in the same way. But is it an okay addition? Yes.
So that's more of an addition, not really a supplement to the worm,
Yeah.
other than the lining on the inside.
lining. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think they do derive some nutrition from it eventually, because it does erode. You know, they do derive some nutrition from it. It's just not fast. And by the time I'm going to harvest my compost, I'm still going to find some eggshell residue. There may be, like on a molecular level, I do believe that it's probably released some of it. Yeah.
I usually put mine in a coffee grinder, and that way they're more powdered.
Wow.
And
Yeah.
you have no residual of it whenever you go in, and it's immediately able to be used.
Right on. Calcium powder.
Yes.
And put it back in your juice.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, come on. Well, speaking of coffee grounds, I failed to mention probably the staple of my worm's diet is coffee grounds. Also a nitrogen source, even though it looks like dirt, it smells like coffee. It's not compost. If it looks like dirt and smells like dirt, then it's probably dirt. But if it looks like dirt and smells like coffee, then it hasn't broken down yet. But this, you know, is a lovely carbon source, the paper filter that I use. And the, you know, coffee beans are a nitrogen source, even though it's been toasted. Some people say like, oh, it's very acidic, and it's actually not that acidic. The acidity is in the coffee that you drank, so that landed in your stomach, not in your worm bin. So good for them. They're still very active, very productive with
So
the
do you
coffee that I
wanna
feed
limit
them.
the amount of coffee that you put in, or is it?
I feed them quite a bit of coffee, actually. It's probably the highest percentage of anything, but I feel like any healthy diet, like you don't want to go overboard. You want to have a good blend of things, you know. So if you were just feeding them coffee, I honestly do not know how well they thrive. I think you probably need to have other things in there too, banana peels, apple cores, you know, potato peels, zucchini skins. This time of year too, just as like we're getting so many wonderful fruits and vegetables coming out of you know, our locale right now. It's yeah, a varied diet I think is good for them as much as it is good for me. I do kind of think of it as animal husbandry. You know, I want to care for them the same way that I would other animals. I really don't want them to be stressed if I can avoid it. So a balanced diet is probably part of that. Yeah.
Coffee in the morning.
Coffee in the morning. Yes. All right. So you can see, let's go back to this for a second. Where'd they all go? You know that there were thousands. You saw them with your own eyes. They disappeared. So I can kind of paw that off and get some relatively worm-free compost. Yeah. See? Where did they go? There they are. They move away from the edge. Oops. If If you can still recognize it, it needs to go back in. See? Isn't that amazing? They do the work. I just go off, make a phone call, have a cup of coffee, something like that, and let them do the work. You can do the bag on the side, but then I wouldn't necessarily feel like they've all moved over. This is, the way that I usually will harvest actually is I'll take a tarp like this and spread it out and dump out the whole thing. That way I can really get down in the corners because the water does tend to drain out. I'll talk about that next. Let's see, what other dumb things have I done to kill my worms? Oh, this might be the time to talk about worm sex. You ready? So, are these boys or girls? Who knows?
Both.
Oh! Spoiler alert. They're hermaphrodites. When I teach this to kids, I have literally had 4th grade teachers be like, but yeah, so they're hermaphroditic, like Hermes, the Greek god, and Aphrodite, the Greek goddess, together. Love word roots. And so what it means basically is that they produce both eggs and sperm. And they can't actually fertilize themselves. They need another worm to fertilize. And if I'm lucky, I can find a worm that is actually reproductive. Because what they have, yes, no? Yeah, is a band just below their heads. You know which end is their head, right? They move in that direction. Oh, here we go. Here's where they all went. So they have bands near the top of their head. It's called the clitellum. And that's where eggs and sperm are stored. And so when 2 worms are reproductive, they will actually fuse together at the clitellum and exchange sperm and thus fertilize the other's eggs. Isn't that crazy? So if you come across worms that are in flagrante, they'll look like they have 1 body, 2 heads, and 2 tails.
I can show.
After class, we'll do that later. There's some drinks, that'll be nice. Okay, so yeah, so then what happens is I'm not finding any, I haven't been feeding them enough, that's what's wrong. Then what happens after they're finished, the eggs are fertilized inside the clitellum, and the clitellum will slide off the worm like you're taking a ring off your finger. And then the ends seal, and you have a little egg case that has 3 or 4 fertilized eggs inside. It's like a cocoon, and it looks like a little seed. It looks like a little round seed. If you don't know what they are, like I didn't know what they are, and start smushing them, they're full of liquid. So don't do that. I told my friend, I was like, I'm finding these little pills, and I'm smushing them, and they're all wet inside. She's like, you're killing babies? Please stop that. So I tell you, so that you don't engage in vermicide like I did. And I'm hoping that before the end of class I will find a worm egg. I don't have eyes like I used to either. But so that's the true story of how worms get it on. All right. So I'm gonna stop futzing with them again. They're a little disturbed. They're a little upset. I'm gonna stop. But this is kind of my finished compost piece right here. So if you can imagine, you know, I spread out the whole thing. I've emptied out the entire box. It's usually when the neighbors come over to see this like spread of dirt in my kitchen. But it just takes, you know, it's probably a project that takes a couple of hours, but I like to know what's going on, and I think it also does give me an opportunity to get in the corners to make sure that it's not going in a little bit down in there. See how wet it is? It's really muddy. One of the ways that you can prevent the worm bed from getting too wet is actually have drainage holes. And you can tell I have a drainage tray here, and I lift it up. Oops. That's not gonna work. Can you help me? Just hold the bottom while, or I'll hold the bottom and you lift the top. There you
Yeah,
go.
he's got one.
Ah! Oh, uh-oh, look at that.
Oh.
Oh,
okay.
uh-oh. Looks not great. But it's better that it's down there than inside the bin, right?
So
Thank
how
you,
many
sir. Appreciate it.
How many holes are on the bottom then?
There's like 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Yeah, and they're pretty good size. They're about this size. What is that, a 1/4 inch bit? Yeah, so some people are like, oh, that's worm tea. No, it's not. You're gonna be teaching this next time, aren't you? All right, yeah, it's not worm tea. That is leachate, and it's liquid that's percolated down through non-rotted stuff as well as rotted stuff. If I want to make tea, I'm going to take my finished compost, put it, what I like to do, I just put it in an old sock, tie the sock to a stick, and dip the sock into a 2-gallon bucket of water, right? So it's suspended, so the stick stays on the edge and the sock just drops down into the water. Tea bag. And let it steep overnight and use it the next day. Easy. 1, maybe like 2 tablespoons or so, like a good handful like this, to 2 gallons of water. And it turns a dark, dark, dark brown. And it is wonderful fertilizer. You can spray it on plants' leaves. It makes them very, they just love it. There's been a lot of studies done actually on the action of vermicompost on leaves. You know, they're very chemically sensitive. The plant and animal and insect world is just absolutely remarkable. I mean, if you're a worm, you don't have any eyes, you can't see, but you breathe through your skin. How do you know to get to rotting stuff? It's the chemicals in the soil that you're in. And I guess the stronger it gets, the closer you're getting to it. I'm not sure. I want to be a worm for just a day. I'd like to find out. But yeah, so lost my train of thought again. Anyway, so help me. Where was I? Seriously.
You're making tea.
I'm making tea.
Spraying it.
Spraying it on the leaves. Thank you. Yeah. So they if a plant is sick, it actually sends out pheromones that are like of a sick, like of an unwell creature, plant. And when they're healthy, they send out different signals. They send out, I am virile and don't bother messing with me because I'm healthy. And so vermicompost, spreading compost tea on leaves stimulates this healthy pheromone. So it prevents disease, it also prevents insect infestation. Pretty amazing.
So do you water plants with that tea as well?
Yeah, I sure do. I mean, the leachate isn't bad. It's just that it's it's where other bacteria is gonna.
It's unprocessed.
It's unprocessed, and so there's like this whole spectrum of bacteria. There's the bacteria; they're kind of the pioneering species, and they're the ones that are going to break through this and get into the pithy interior. So that's kind of your pioneer bacteria species. And with leachate, they're carrying the pioneer species along with the species of bacteria that are in the finished stuff. And it's all together in there. So if I'm watering my plants, I don't want to water them with bacteria that can eat through. Also, there's other bacteria that will thrive in an aerobic environment. There's other bacteria that will thrive in an anaerobic wet environment, like salmonella. I mean, salmonella is all around us all the time. E. coli also. However, I don't want to create an environment that really encourages their growth. So I will get rid of the leachate from time to time because it's that wet fecal matter just staying that could create a situation where you get an overgrowth of a certain type of bacteria. Nobody wants that. So I get rid of my leachate on a regular basis. I will dump it outside. I'm somewhere where I'm not being too fussy about it. I won't put it on my vegetable garden. I won't put it on my flowers. But somewhere where it's like, where I'm back in the compost. That works too. Okay, so that's the difference between leachate and tea. We've talked about feeding. Oh, the reason I keep it inside is also because of temperature. These animals are very much like we are. They can get too cold, they can get too hot. You know, a range of temperature probably between 50 and 80 degrees is really their range. I will bring my bin to festivals and things like that, and 190-degree day outside, and they are bumming. They just are like, you gotta be kidding me. And I have killed worms, guess what? Leaving them in my car. Yeah. So don't do that. I know, it's like the untold story of worm abuse. We all have stories like that. Don't judge me. Anyway, okay, so back to the harvest. Just gonna, but you get a feel for it, you know? You get to where you actually, and I'm sorry that I'm jumping all over the place. I'm a little rusty.
And how often do you feed them?
Oh, that's a great question. So I feed them at least once a week. And as I said before, their population will rise and fall depending on the amount that you feed them. So when I start a worm bin, I will feed them pretty conservatively, you know, and wait for them to catch up. And the way that you know that they're not caught up yet is that the food just isn't going away. If it's been a week and it doesn't look like it's been disturbed that much, then just wait longer. Give them 2 weeks, maybe 3 weeks, for them to totally get through all that. And then they'll start making babies, and you'll know. Some interesting situation here with the newspaper. I think we're just gonna put that whole thing back. I'm not gonna try to pick them off.
And when you're starting with them, does it help to cut things smaller?
Oh yeah. That makes it easier, I think. You know, they don't have teeth, they don't chew, but that exposure to the soft stuff will definitely help them, help it decompose faster. It also exposes more surface area to bacteria, so it's gonna break down faster that way too. Great question. So, okay, I think I'm kind of done fitzing with it this time. Just gonna sort of bring it in a little closer. I always lose 1 or 2 this way. Sorry, they come, guys, gals. They. Okay.
How often do you harvest out of it, or do you just see what the level is? In the
Yes.
box?
I mean, in a perfect world, I would probably do it at least every 6 months. But I'm just busy, you know. They don't seem that bothered by it. If I don't feed them with the amount of composting here, if I don't feed them for weeks at a time, I can go 3 weeks without feeding them at all. They will reprocess their castings and gain nutrition out of it. And so they will continue to reprocess their castings, which is one of the reasons why it's like this. It's so crumbly and it's so fine. So it's also a little too wet. Could do with a little more carbon. It also helps absorb water. So I think what we can do now is move on to the construction phase. How are we doing for time? It's already drilled out. But one thing that I decided was that the holes just really aren't big enough. It wasn't draining very well. So I took it back and for you guys, I feel bad for the staff. Like, they already cleaned up. I'm like, I'm gonna be harvesting worms in here, and she was like, so, oh well, it's free. So I'm just gonna, boom, like that. To do 4, like that. There's little ones, so I'm gonna leave that like that, just 4 in a corner. The other thing that I've learned also, in a bin like this with the raised up bins, don't drill it here. You're gonna set it right down on top. You wanna elevate it so that it actually has room for stuff to drain out. Also, don't put the newspaper in and then drill. Drill first. And then, can I have some help shredding newspaper? So here's the fun. Did you vote early? So here's where I've learned that you want to tear along, what is it, like the
grain.
The grain.
Yeah.
There's like the weaver over here would know. What is it when you weave? I forget.
So warp and weft.
The warp and
Yeah.
weft. Thank you. Yeah. So you want to, I think, tear with one of those. So anyway, just like that, about an inch thick, just like that. So
So what about using like a paper shredder?
here you go. Oh, that's a great question. So yeah, sure. Do you feel left out?
No.
You're good. Okay.
But I can do it for you.
So I'll finish that one off. All right. So shredded office paper. I don't know if it's the bleach.
Or shred it.
Or shred it. Shred it up.
Okay, 'cause that's what I've used.
You actually can do that.
Okay.
Yeah,
I
of
wasn't
course.
sure if it was too small or.
Yeah, no, I think it's fine. The thing that I don't like to, I do tend to use newspaper just because I know that the fibers are really short. I don't know what it is with office paper, if it's the bleach or the binding or what, it's kind of gluey. And so it makes a compost that's gray and sort of pasty. I don't like it.
Yeah, I just use newspaper.
Yeah, and some of us are of a certain age. You probably remember when dyes were made with heavy metals, like they actually used lead, and lead dye is a miracle. I can talk to you. Yeah, thank you, PA. Because now basically they're made with vegetable-based inks, and so they're really okay. So the other thing I've learned is that now that I put in these, these are a little too thick. Yeah, so the other thing that I've learned is that now that I've put the drainage holes in and I want to wet the newspaper, don't pour water into the bin. You actually maybe want another container. And so this is pretty good, right? Anybody ever make pesto? You know, where you start out with all of this wonderful basil, and then you shred it, and it's like, zoom, you end up with like a teaspoon. So that's what's gonna happen as soon as we wet this newspaper. We've got, like, we think we've got half a bin. As soon as I'm gonna wet it down, and it's gonna just feel like a little corner, we're gonna be like, where the heck did we go? So that's why I brought a whole stack, but we're gonna do our best right now. And I'm gonna take my jug of water and just do a little. I'm gonna change my mind. That's my prerogative. So I used to shop at the Scrap Exchange a lot, and I found these lids. And I bought the whole stack. They have made the best drainage trays, and this is actually the last one. So the lucky winner of the raffle here tonight is going to have this vintage Rubbermaid Scrap Exchange lineage lid for your drainage tray. But really anything will work. You know, you can, I've used aluminum baking trays, I've used the lid of other you know, Rubbermaid containers. It works just fine. You know, some people actually don't even put drainage holes in there, but I don't trust it. It just gets too soupy and wet, and especially like the summer with
Cardboard in at the same time. After a while, you start learning the percentages of water in each of the vegetables to know how much. It's
Wow.
just a learning phase.
It's a learning thing, you know, and then you get a fig tree, and you have to learn that all over again. I mean, yes, I mean, it's true, right? Like cucumbers and zucchini and, you know, these amazing vegetables that we have are loaded with moisture. So when they break down, they actually release all of that moisture into your bin. Another reason why it's so critical to have enough carbon to help absorb it so that you don't make your worms have to swim.
If you freeze the fruits or vegetables, because maybe you got too much to give them, you can freeze it. But then that
That's
means
extra
it
moisture.
breaks down all of the moisture
The cellulosic,
more.
yeah.
So I made that mistake by freezing, you need to add double the cardboard.
Oh, and I mean, if cardboard works for you, I prefer newspaper just because it breaks down a lot faster than the cardboard does. So, and I
Really
find
just
that
getting it damp.
I want to try to get that 70% saturation. So, yeah, I mean, generally I'll do this in my sink at home. And once I make my bin, I have a spray bottle nearby. So when I put newspaper fresh on top, I spritz it with water. If it's too wet, I'll take the newspaper and just tuck it in, underneath, so that it can absorb some of that additional moisture. And the worms hang out in it. It's not really their nutrition source. The nitrogen is where they're getting their nutrition. But they do hang out in it, and eventually they eat it. It does break apart, so you do have to add more. Also, because you just don't want to have that fruit fly situation. So I always make sure that there's enough newspaper on top to foil any flying critters. And I mean, I've had people that have given me their worm bins because they have flies, and they don't know what to do. And the way that I fix that problem is I stop feeding. No more food for anybody. The worms can take it. The flies don't live that long. You know what I mean? So you can kind of starve them out. So just stop feeding, and then put a nice layer of carbon on top so you don't have any sort of residuals. And eventually, after a couple weeks, the fruit fly population will have diminished down to next to nothing, and your worms will be just fine. They've been eating their own poop for a while. The flies can't do that, so they're fine. Hey, not bad. Yes.
And so if you have a situation like that, you talk about putting newspaper on top, it's always shredded newspaper on top?
Yes, yeah. That's the other thing too with cardboard. I'm just afraid that it wouldn't breathe as well. It's actually just as hair dry. I don't want the worms to stick to it, you know what I mean? I really do want to make sure that it's wet enough that it doesn't stick to their little skin.
Have you named your worms? I know you have.
No.
You haven't?
No. That's silly. I've taught classes where the kids have named them, this is Wiggly and this is Squiggly. But yeah, there's too many. I just, I do think of them as my pets. They're my friends. They're, it's a test, when I've been dating, do you want to see my worms? Just see what the reaction is.
How's that work out?
I'm single. So there you go. So maybe don't start out with that. Anyway, so gonna paw my dirt some more. Da, 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 da. Isn't that amazing? Look at this, virtually worm free, right? That fly did not come from me. No. I don't know where it came from, but I didn't bring it in. Okay. Here's the avocado shell. That's gonna, take a minute. Newspaper still, strawberry.
Do you ever try to pick out the eggs when you're harvesting?
Oh no! I would have a nervous breakdown. They're too small. They are way too small. They're like the size.
No, I've done, I mean, that.
Have you done
that.
it?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Well, no, I mean.
It took me a long time.
I would be so
probably didn't
neurotic.
matter because everybody died. But I tried.
Oh, yeah, see, I just don't bother. I feel like, I give them room and board. There's some sacrifices sometimes. I am not finding any eggs. I'm really discouraged. So I feel like it's probably because I haven't been feeding it enough, to be honest. Okay. That'd be great. I mean, they look like little amber beads. And now that you know how they're made, you can watch for that too. And see, this one looks like it's kind of getting a little bit of a clitellum forming. See that band right there? Or got that clump of dirt on my thumb?
Yeah.
That's a clitellum. There we go. If I squish it together, see?
Yep.
That's the clitellum. So
And
this,
that thing
oh, there we
slides,
go.
and that thing slides off.
When it's fertilized, yeah.
That's cool.
Isn't that
Yeah, I
crazy?
never knew that they did that.
Yeah. Yeah. See, that's right there. This is where
You
we're
see
starting
it. I
at.
mean, it's easy to see on an earth.
Yeah.
I always
Yeah.
just thought that was a permanent.
Yeah,
So
well,
what-
not all of them have it.
What kind of worm, are these red wigglers or what kind of worms do you have?
These are, so, they're, I think, I'm gonna say,
Having sex?
who told you that? I found an egg. You know what they look like, you've been right. It's just a tiner. It's just a little itty bitty. I know, right?
Oh,
The more
gosh.
mature the worm, the bigger the
The
cocoon.
bigger the cocoon, see? Yeah, so this is just the babies are,
Gosh, I wouldn't even notice that.
yeah, I know. So, I mean, I can't imagine trying to, it's a testimony to your neuroses that you actually tried to pick them out.
I just wanted to have as many
That's, yeah,
worms as possible in my group.
there you go, there you go. See, I'm kind of like, they'll make more. Okay, gonna
So
put it
you
back
could
together.
potentially be pulling out the cocoons
In here, yeah,
Yeah, there
yeah.
are some.
And you know, when I put it, so another thing that I'm gonna do here tonight is make a little soil mix. But we'll do that in a minute. Okay, so I scooshed it all together again. So, kind of take that off the top. Jeez, you're gonna kill me. You're not gonna have me back. Okay. All right, so what do you think? Is that enough in here? Should we put in more?
Yeah, not the foggiest idea.
That's what we're here to find out.
Yeah.
I feel like that would be enough to get started. That would probably be enough to get started. The main thing that I want to do is be able to bury the food, right? So if I'm going to bury the food, then I don't want to have, then I definitely want to have enough newspaper.
So when
'Cause it's
you
gonna take
start,
a-
do you just have the food, the newspaper, and the worms?
And the worms.
Nothing, do you
So-
put any soil mix in? and
Some
with it at all?
people do put a little bit of mineral soil in. I mentioned they don't have teeth, but they do have a crop, like birds do, right? So they will swallow granular material to help them grind their food. But of course, we're talking very small particles, and I feel like on a lot of the rinds and things, lettuce leaves that I throw in, they have particulate materia. And so you can also help inoculate your bin with bacteria from your garden soil if you want to. So you're adding that particulate matter as well as, excuse me, that's fine.
Because they're not really soil dwellers.
Which is that?
You don't want to put a ton of soil in there because they're not really soil dwellers.
Right. Oh yeah, they're in the tippy top where things are breaking down. Isn't that interesting? So yeah, you don't. So you could maybe put a handful in for the granular material and for the bacterial content, but I often don't. What I will do is I'll add parent material, so they still have a little bit of, you know, like when you're homesick, you might bring a blanket or something from the house, and it's kind of like that.
Coconut core?
Core, yeah, some people like to use that for their bedding. I never would
It
buy
helps with moisture,
it.
but it's really sterile, so it doesn't have any of the microbes that you need.
Okay.
You know, so this already has all the microbes that you need.
Yeah,
So therefore.
Well, if you're starting out with scratch, you don't have that.
Right. Right. So it takes a while for your
Yeah.
microbes to develop.
it'll come in on the food that you put in.
I think the kit that I bought,
Uh-huh.
I couldn't afford it.
Oh,
I got one of those stacking units.
oh, okay, sorry to be to diss it right off the bat.
It's right, it's
Yeah.
totally fun. I've never,
Do you love it?
I've never stacked. I've
Oh,
only stacked like 2 high.
okay, okay.
Because what they were saying to do is like if the bottom, when the bottom bin gets full, then you start
Feeding
another
on the
layer
top.
on top, and you start feeding on top.
And they'll-
so
they'll
those
graduate
would
up.
all
Yep, yep.
Go up there,
Yep.
and then you can harvest the bottom.
Yep.
And then that's when I'm getting the eggs out.
Oh,
But then,
okay.
that's when I started having problems. Like
What were the problems?
everybody died.
Everybody died.
Yeah. And I didn't harvest everything. And
Okay.
I moved some of the stuff up top and everything. And I bought worms from those guys that you.
Okay, new soil, and those are the ones that died?
Yeah.
Oh, I'm
And
so
I mean,
sorry.
they lasted about a year or so.
Yeah.
Maybe over a year.
And these are like the
It
great
was my
grain worms that I've had
It was
since
my second
'90s, so.
run.
Did you have mouth
No, I have them right beside the trash can. And I use, stuff off the cutting board. I never fit in anything bad.
Yeah.
Did you fluff the bottom bin?
Once in a while.
Sometimes
We're trying to
it gets
troubleshoot.
too compacted,
Yeah.
and then if it gets too moist and compacted, then it can't read.
Gotcha.
I was gonna ask, do you ever reach down and just loosen everything up with your
Yeah, I
hands?
have one of those.
Good.
Yeah,
one
from
of
time to
those
time,
little things
I
that
do,
go like that, and I would
but
screw it up.
mostly it's to see like
I
how,
chopped up
what
my
conditions
food
are.
fine and everything.
And I think I do end up topping it up a little bit. But then I also think that the worms do a lot of that on their own.
Okay.
You know, they have the run of the house. And so some people, like if they see the worms up on the edge and stuff like that, they don't like that. They want them, but they're just exploring, they're just hanging out. So long as they stay inside, you're good. So I kind of feel like I'm almost ready here for
Got about
a
20
big
minutes.
reveal. Are we ready?
Sure.
Okay, so here's one crumb. Okay. Anybody want to hold them? Yeah, I do. This is what I came here for. Isn't that wonderful?
They're so tiny.
I love doing this with kids. I'm like, you can't throw them. I put them in your hands. You cannot throw them. You can't throw them.
Did you ever decide what kind of worms, or these are a mixture of?
I think,
different types
yeah,
of
they
worms?
started out as Acenia fetida, but I've put in other species. And, but they're in the same sort of non-burrowing family. But I don't think that these aren't pure tiger worms anymore.
I think you got some Indian blues in there too.
Do I? I have no idea. I've never even heard of them. I'm actually quite chipper.
Indian blues are actually
She got it.
ferocious eaters compared to the red wigglers.
Is that right?
Almost double.
Oh, he's like, I'm good. I wonder where they came from then. Because I did have.
They also
Isn't it
populate
tickle?
twice as fast too.
Big, all right.
So,
Where do you want these?
once you get them,
little
it's hard to get rid of
Okay.
them.
Well, and why wouldn't I want them with all their benefits?
They have one little stipulation, being they're tropical, so
Oh.
they cannot handle cold at all.
Okay.
So, North Carolina, we would not be able to keep them outside.
Yeah, well, I wouldn't put it outside anyway. Just, we have
Making friends?
Uh-oh, okay. Huh?
Making
They
friends?
also
I've
are
had goat
very
food, horse
more
food,
sensitive to
everything else on
barometric
me
pressure.
today, so.
There you go.
So you can't have them like in a laundry room where you're gonna have a washing machine that's gonna be shaking.
Oh, they don't like, you sure?
They don't
On
like
top
that.
of
And
Put them with the others.
thunderstorms, they don't like that
Yes,
either.
there we go.
As a group.
I know, as a
As a
group, I
group.
don't,
They
they're
need a
my
group
worms, they're my worms. Well,
Here, I had one that wanted to stay with
Yeah.
me.
okay. Yeah, they'll do that.
The babies
So,
are the hardest ones to
I
find
think-
when you're.
Yeah, he was.
And
down
this is
late.
like not, this is maybe, I don't know, I would say maybe half a
Quarter
pound,
pound.
quarter pound. Half pound, quarter. Should've brought my kitchen scale.
So they all gather together in a clump, is
Yes.
that what you're saying?
Yeah,
Very
they
good.
are kind of oddly social in that way, especially when they get stressed, which they are
Which they are
definitely,
right now.
they're pretty unhappy.
Yeah, they're pretty,
Like
they're
right now.
non-stop moving.
They're like, I don't dig what's happening right now. We have salts on our fingers too. So I'm just gonna go ahead and actually just grab this whole thing, right? So we'll end up with about a half pound here, which is a good starter population, I think, of this mix of reds and blues.
Wiggle,
Purples.
Okay. Okay. So, so there's the worms, there's the thin newspaper, and here's the food. Do people want me to feed them?
Yeah.
Well, they're
Put
hungry.
that much in there. This little guys.
Yeah,
Wow.
yeah, you maybe don't want to feed them for a while.
Yeah,
Wait till this goes away.
yeah.
But they're gonna be hungry.
No, I'm not good.
Yeah, they're gonna be hungry. So, yeah, so I'm just gonna kind of disperse them a little bit, cover them up, and then I'm gonna bury the food on the other side.
Now, why on the other side?
Just because,
Make
I don't
them
know.
work for it.
yeah, and just because they're all clumped up together, and I don't want to just go kunk on top of them.
Got you.
Just,
Got you. When they're
it
calling,
just
they'll
seems,
go looking for
they'll
it.
go looking
Yeah.
for it. Things will kind of break down a little bit.
Plus, if the food starts creating heat, you want to be able to give them a place to escape to.
Oh, that's a really good point.
Right.
Yeah, hopefully that's not enough to be creating any heat. That isn't the kind of volume that'll generate any, but that is a good point.
So if you were at home and making a coffee in the morning,
Oops.
well, after it's gotten started,
Okay.
like would you, if this were an established little colony, would
Mhm.
you keep adding, like, I made 2 cups of coffee in the morning, I made a salad and I threw the extras in
Yes.
there, just on an ongoing basis?
Actually, generally what I'll do is I'll keep a container
Mhm.
on the counter, and I'll. No,
But you don't
I'm
want
making it
to,
up.
you don't want it to get yucky.
You don't want it to
Before
get
you put
yucky.
it-
For my
before you
worms,
put it-
actually, I'll shed it right off the cutting board into the bin. You know, I was just making up a story. That's what I do with my outdoor stuff.
But
Please
you
edit
can,
that.
You can overfeed too, then, because then
You
they
most definitely
can't,
can.
they can't eat it, and then it just turns into waste.
Yeah, and so that's why you want to back up. If you see that the food is backing up, stop. Just stop feeding them and let them catch up.
And at that point, you just put it in your regular outdoor thing or put it in the freezer
I
and
do.
hold off?
I do. I mean, if you're like when I was in an apartment, like I hadn't been composting at all before that. So if I have to throw away some for a time until they catch up, then it's okay. Like it's
Yeah.
not perfect. It's not necessarily going to be 100%.
No, we
But
have
it's a
chickens,
very
you feed
good.
it to your chickens.
True. I did not have chickens in my apartment. I have rising college, but they will. They'll eat everything.
How long
So-
will it take for them to, that population to eat the amount of food you just
Did you say about 3 weeks or so?
I wouldn't say that long. It'll take maybe a couple weeks. Yeah, I mean, this population, it's more like that is so like, yeah, it shouldn't take them long. Actually, I would say like within a week, you should see a very dramatic change.
Yeah.
The banana peel will be mostly gone. The softest stuff will be mostly gone. The things that's gonna stick around is that rigid, the broccoli.
Banana
Stop.
stem.
What else the coffee grounds are gonna be virtually undetectable. So the softer stuff will go away. If you wanna give them a treat, like throw in some rotten strawberries, that apple core is gonna be gone in a couple of days. Like that's gonna be history. So it really depends on the density and the size of the material. I also forgot to mention, we were talking about acidity before. I do avoid citrus, orange peels and lemon peels and things like that. Not only will that tend to mold, acidity can lead to moldy conditions. I'm not allergic to mold, but from what I understand, if you want to become allergic to mold, a good way is to be exposed to it. So don't do that. Also, they're very acidic and they're antibacterial. We have cleaning agents that use citrus, lemon, and orange and things like that. So you're actually killing bacteria, which the worms are eating. So it's unhappy for them.
Out of those.
So I just keep the citrus out.
So when I would feed mine, I was telling her, I would mince stuff. Is
Okay.
that good or bad?
I think it's great.
Okay.
I mean, if you want to go through that, I don't.
I mean, I would take a banana peel and
Yeah. See, I mean, you're like,
and throw it.
I
in
don't
there.
know why. I don't know what we
either.
did wrong.
You should have been happy worms.
They should have been really happy. I mean, maybe they weren't getting enough exercise. You were doing all the work for them. I don't know.
Do you
Maybe.
always feed them at one end, like you always put the food in at the far end?
I'll do that for a while and then I'll switch.
Okay.
It also depends. I mean, honestly, like when I have been creating a worm bin for a house that's going to be sharing or for an office that's going to be sharing, make a quadrant. And we are feeding here this week. We are feeding here this week, and so on, so that someone doesn't just dump it on the top, and think that it's going to be okay. Like you actually, have to be really specific and make sure that someone is keeping an eye on it, because the temptation to dump and run in a situation like that is high.
Take a little round lid from the top of a plastic container, put it on top wherever you fed it last.
Oh, I just pile up the newspaper.
But then you can,
on that
and
side.
like,
That's one
if you
thing I
put it in
do.
different areas, you can also kind of get the idea of what they like more.
Got you.
I guess.
I mean, if you,
I
like,
wanna-
if stuff
yeah.
sits around for a little bit, then it's like, oh, they don't like that as much as they like that minced banana peel that they just were all ruined.
Yeah, I just want them, I want them to eat all the food that I eat, so
Yeah.
I don't care that much
Gotcha.
about what they
Maybe
like
I
or
could.
they don't like.
You
I mean,
have to
yeah.
realize certain
So
foods
do you
are
add
fast
newspaper
food,
every time
slow
you
food.
feed, or just when
But
the
just enough to cover.
newspapers?
Gotcha.
So you can see, like, I plugged in that whole bunch of
Okay.
food, and I just covered it up.
Okay, but
So
once it gets established and you start getting your
to-
castings,
Yep,
Blanch them in water.
if the
first,
newspaper is
Okay.
completed, then
and
you'll
then throw it
add,
in.
Alright.
how much would you add
Carrots.
after this is?
I wanna make sure that there's at least an inch or two
That
of
would make
top.
sense.
Peeler or something like
Always,
that.
always.
Root vegetables.
And then you would
Yeah.
do the same thing that you
Broccoli
did
stalks,
with this, is you
cabbage
would wet
stalks,
the
all that.
newspaper.
I'm having a hard time
Make it
with this, so, I can just go like this and kind of make it nice and wet when I add fresh newspaper. Okay, so that's really more of the moisture that I'm looking for, right? Kind of squishy. But you always want to keep a lid, if you will, like a initial lid of newspaper on top of any food matter, at least an inch or two. You saw when I first opened this up, it was completely covered, even though it's like no doubt there's plenty of castings inside that I can bury food waste in, and it just, you know, creates an additional layer of protection against flies, and it also creates that enough carbon to kind of counterbalance the nitrogen that I'm putting in, so it continues to have that puffiness and porosity. I still want to have that balance. It's not the same necessarily as when I'm composting outside and I want like 60-40 carbon to nitrogen by volume. It's not like that. It's more like just keep coverage and, you know, make sure that it's not getting too wet and soupy. Okay, sorry to interrupt you guys.
No,
So
that's
what
okay.
were you
No,
talking about?
no,
It's like, I just, too many rock shows. I can't hear what's in front of me. If there's no, you know,
I'm there with
you can totally relate. Okay,
Oh,
good.
yeah.
Yeah. So what were you saying? Share it with the
We're
group.
just talking about
About
food.
fast
Talking of
foods
food,
versus
Food
slow food.
preparation.
Oh,
They're
okay.
gonna go after the soft foods first.
And
They're
the
gonna-
sweet stuff.
the potato peels, any kind of root vegetable is gonna take longer.
Mm-hmm.
Any kind of broccoli stems, cabbage stems are gonna
Mm-hmm.
take longer,
Yeah, and it's just okay.
you know.
You just like, I just kind of feel okay about that.
Mango
And they're
seed.
not unhappy. I've never heard any complaints.
Mango seed, you know, it's
Oh,
gonna take them a couple
forever.
weeks to actually get to the
Mhm.
point where they can go in it. And then it's so funny to sit there and peek inside and
And then there's
see 'em.
there's like another little almond seed
Yeah.
inside. Yes.
So if you wanted to take this
Mhm.
concept and with your indoor composting
Mm-hmm.
and you wanted to expand it onto a larger scale,
Mm-hmm.
then would you just make like the beds with the
Mhm.
sifters and the whole
You can do
type
that.
things?
I
or-
mean, make a bigger container. You know, just use a bigger container. And I mean, you don't want to go too deep, right? But
keep it shallow.
yeah, relatively shallow. You know, the places other places where I've purchased worms, you know, where they are sensitive to the ebb and flow of the seasons, you know, they won't come up in early spring. They won't come up until, you know, things actually warm up. And so it could be a ditch, you know, a trough, you know, like an old horse trough or something like that works really well. Do you have,
Old bathtub.
They work. They're also insulated.
55-gallon drum and
Turn
split it in half. And
mm-hmm.
Because we're looking to do it on the farm for you know, produce and
Oh,
waste and things like that.
Great.
Well, we feed our chickens a lot of things,
Yeah.
but I'd love to do it on a smaller scale, kind of get the gist of
Sure.
it. But then I would like to try to expand it because I buy castings now to put
Oh my
into.
gosh, right? This is like $100.
Yeah, I know.
You know,
That's why
isn't
I
that
want to
crazy?
start doing it ourselves.
You can totally do it yourself. I hope you win.
I hope so too.
Let's see what happens.
But so we're trying to, we use it now with our garden. We do all our organic flowers and vegetables and everything.
Mm-hmm.
But I wanna be able to utilize everything, and if it doesn't go to the chickens, it goes to the worms, and try not to, I wanna try to make it completely waste-free.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
we're
that's
reusing-
amazing.
It's called the Crazy Daisy Farm. We're in North Hillsboro.
Oh, awesome. Are you related?
It's my son.
Okay, yep.
He works there
It
too.
runs in the family, okay.
Nice.
All
We don't
right.
look like this during the daytime.
Oh, no, we would.
We have greenhouses, and then we have field,
Oh, that's
and we
marvelous. All
have,
right. Well, I'll keep my eyes open for you guys for sure.
we're new,
That's
so
wonderful.
we're just getting established.
That's
it.
great. That's great. Well, I'm thrilled to have you here, and would love to hear more about, how things progress as you.
But yeah, we
Especially
wanna get a
trying
gist
permaculture.
on how, on the workings of it, and then we would
Okay.
like to expand it into, and it's pretty much for self-usage.
Okay.
Nice.
Well, I'm gonna stop there.